Hello and welcome this Friday afternoon on this last session about Power BI. When Luc asked me to prepare for this session, he told me actually Power BI is a hot topic, we should do something about that. And I got started to think, well, what should I tell actually about Power BI, because there was so much to tell. So I had the idea that, okay, let's go over the tool set together, let's see which tools we have available out there, how we can use them. Then hopefully after the session you should have a good idea on which tool might be the best for you or for your company. So let's get started with an overview. And if you look at powerbi.com, if you go to the website, we talk about the self-service revolution. It means that you can make use of the Power BI toolset for everybody in your organization without having to be a rocket scientist to get started. And that's a very, very big shift between how it was in the past and how it is right now. In the past, we needed to create these expensive data warehouses and cubes, and it took years before they were ready. Then if you needed to make a change, it took even longer. Now with the Power BI tool stack, we are ready to do it all ourselves. We have a rich set of reports, a tool set that we can use. We can distribute them around in the organization. You can access them via web browser. You can access them on your mobile device. So, okay, if you get started, you might be interested to connect to a number of data sources. And I try to collect a couple of them here on the slide. And about every month, new data sources are being added to the Power BI tool stack. So if you use one of the products, these are actually data sources you can use, you can connect to directly. If your data source isn't on here, of course, you can also create a different kind of a connection. So you can connect to whatever matters to you. We can do this with the Power BI tool stack, but of course also Power Apps and Flow. So the self-service revolution means that you will create Power BI reports or reports. You can start, for example, using the Power BI desktop. You can start from Excel, where you develop your reports. And then to distribute them to your users, you can make use of the Power BI service, which is actually powerbi.com, the website, where you can upload your reports. Certain reports require a connection to a database which might be on-premise. It might be, for example, a NAV database on SQL Server. It might be a cube, might be something else. And to be able to harvest that data, you can install and configure the gateway. And there are two versions of the gateway. One is actually meant for Power BI, and the other one is also meant so you can access the same data sources using Power Apps and Flow. If you have time enough today, I might also demo on how to get that working. So once we have our reports in the cloud, we can access them, we can share them, depending on the account you have on powerbi.com, the free version, the paying version. You can store more or less data. You can refresh more or less frequently. Now, this is the architecture at the moment, but in the future, there might also become an extra possibility. It might become available to do everything on-premise. I have heard and read that with the next release of SQL Server, one of the upcoming service packs, it might also become possible to host and execute our Power BI reports instead on the Power BI service within reporting services, for example, in the report manager. So then we will also have a complete on-premise solution. So we have a lot of tools that we can use. We have our data, might be on-premise, it might be in the cloud. We need to start to build a data model, then we need to analyze and alter our data model, and then we need to figure out a way on how to deliver all of that information and how to consume it. You have a lot of possibilities. Now first, let me start with a question, the one I always start with when I also deliver Power BI or reporting or any kind of BI training. The question is always, what is BI? BI means something else depending on who you are. And actually, BI is an umbrella term. It means that we should implement some kind of software or practice that should lead to better insights and decisions. That's actually the most important. You should know what you do and how you do it and how to create it. And the idea is to visualize facts to our end users, facts coming from our enterprise applications. We can make use of data warehouses, cubes. Typically in the past, the cube was where the single version of the truth was held, but in real life, actually, users prefer to work with Excel. So in the past, we had kind of a contradiction between the very intelligent IT people, partners, developers creating these warehouses, and the users wanting to make use of them in Excel. Well, with Power BI, now we have a solution that can actually satisfy both types of usages. So when you will start to build your own reports, hopefully after this session, what you are going to do is go in circles. You'll start by connecting what matters to you. You can connect information from one or multiple data sources. I will show you a couple of examples. The sky is the limit. Using our Power BI tools, we can bring your reports to life. We have a solution for the whole organization. And we can visualize and analyze and even predict the future. With every new version of Power BI, new features have been added. And in the latest version of the Power BI desktop tool, we can even do some predictive analysis based on the data sets that we provide to certain visuals. Now, it can be a difficult road to travel in, or if you travel in the Power BI forest, you will notice lots of trees. And the first choice you will need to make is, what am I going to use? And I try to divide all the different trees or tools on 2 slides. On the first slide, we'll see Power Query, Power Pivot, Power View, and Power Map, which are the tools that you can use if you are a user who works in Excel. You would like to work in Excel, you would like to continue to work in Excel, but also harvest the power of Power BI. But then we have these tools available. If you're not really limited to Excel, but you're open to use other tools, or you don't have, for example, this version, this licensed version of Excel that allows you to use the tools, you can switch over to the Power BI desktop application. Power BI desktop also includes a way to query data, Power Query. It also includes a way to visualize the data and to shape and model the information. So you have everything in one tool, which is completely free. When you use a Power BI desktop, you can upload your reports to the servers online. In the future, we will be able to host them on-premise in reporting services. We have a mobile solutions, and since the release of the latest version of NAV, we can make use of the Power BI API to embed our reports in NAV. I'll also demonstrate that later. So, when you would like to get started, the first thing that you need to do is think before you begin. I cannot repeat this enough. The tools that we have out there are such very amazing, they look very attractive, you can create very stunning reports, but to get them right, you need to start to think about your data model. And even though we're not creating a data warehouse, and even though we might not be creating cubes, you still need to think in the star schema, which means that the information you would like to analyze, you will gather that in a table. Let's call it a table, which is in the center, and we'll call that the facts, and that table contains measures. Surrounding that table, we'll drop our other tables, for example, customers or products, a timeline, which we call dimension tables. It doesn't need to be NAV dimensions, can be actually attributes that you would like to use to slice and dice the data. And whatever tool that you use, this is actually a very interesting and performant way to create a data model, which we can then use to present or visualize your information. Now, all of the tools that we use also have different programming languages that the tools actually use. So you can be a user without any technical knowledge that goes and uses the tools to create a report. But if you'd like to go a little bit deeper, then you might need to start to learn SQL, M, DAX, MDX, R, and whatever letter is next in the alphabet that might become available in the Power BI tool stack. So what are these languages meant for? Let's start with a small introduction. SQL or T-SQL is actually the language that you use to go to a database. You can generate it. You can also use that in the context of Power BI reports. We execute that before data is important to pre-filter, to join tables, to make use of maybe views, store procedures, and so on, to build a little bit of logic in our queries and to make them a little bit more performance. SQL is not so difficult to learn. Most of it can be generated. Of course, if you create it yourself, it might be better. After SQL, we have M. Now, M is actually our Power Query language that we use. And you will use M during the import of the data. And M has a lot of functionalities. It's actually a programming language which will transform, clean up, create custom columns. Actually, it's a very, very, very rich language. It contains lots of definitions. It's generated automatically if you use a Power Query editor in Power Query or in Power BI desktop, but it can become a little bit difficult. So it will need some practice to be able to get good at M, because the language behaves different than other languages. It's actually a step-by-step language, as I name it myself. After M, we have DAX. And DAX is actually where the added value is of Power BI and where you will spend most of your time. We will use DAX or DAX expressions, like you can create formulas in Excel to enrich our data model. You can create DAX, for example, to create custom columns, to create measures or KPIs. We'll think about how to create the data model, which DAX formulas that we will create, and then we will use a number of DAX patterns, and I will also come back about that later. DAX is not so difficult. It's like creating a formula in Excel, but one very important thing to understand about DAX expressions is context. You can create a very simple expression, calculate the sum of the quantity in the sales fact table, and if you drop that, for example, in a matrix, the sum will be recalculated depending on the context of the row and the column and so on. And the kind of calculation you perform in your DAX formula will make it sensitive or insensitive to certain types of context. Now, it's quite abstract. We'll come back about that later. Then we also have MDX. MDX is the language that you use, for example, in cubes or analysis services. I find that relatively difficult, although when you create cubes, for example, there are a number of tools out there that can generate them for you automatically. You can use MDX to pre-filter, to query data. MDX is a little bit like DAX. You can also use that, for example, to create KPIs and measures in your multi-dimensional analysis services databases and so on. So that's MDX. We can also use that, of course, in a Power BI context. And then we have R, a new programming language, or actually a new programming language in our Power BI stack, but R actually is a language that has been used by scientists all over the world to perform actually some very powerful calculations. R was introduced in the Power BI tool stack to be able to create visuals in a program or via program or function that you create, but R can actually also be used before, during and after data import. They can be very short. You can use R for everything in Power BI. It's a fully fledged programming language, but I've rated it difficulty 4. It's one of the most difficult languages. It's like, for example, when you start with PowerShell. It sounds also very difficult in the beginning, but if you build a little bit of knowledge and experience in that, it will go okay. But R, personally, you should see that as your last resort. If you cannot do it with any of the other tools we have at our disposal, okay, then we go to R and we can make use of its functionality. So these are the languages that we will encounter in our journey in all of the Power BI products. Let's get started with Power Query. And Power Query is something that we will use automatically, or we will create scripts in Power Query using our M language. Now, how will we use Power Query? Power Query is actually the engine which will transform the data. We can have it access multiple data sources. It goes to the Power Query engine, and it comes out, for example, as a pivot table in Excel. Power Query started in Excel to generate tables. We can transform data. Power Query is actually somewhere in the ribbon in Excel. If you open it, you have lots of buttons that you can use to do data transformations. Try to paste a couple of these buttons here on the slide, but there are many more. And if you look a little bit at Power Query, and if it's completely new to you, but you have a little bit of experience, for example, in integration services, ETL, extract, transform, and load, then Power Query will be more and more familiar. And that's actually how you use it to extract data, transform it when you're loading it in your data model. We can do it right here in Excel, but we can also do that, for example, in Power BI Desktop. So we have some buttons that we can play with to load the data, to transform the data, and then at the end we'll click on the load in our Excel file button, or load in data model, which will then create a pivot table on which we can work. We can start from different data sources. We can also, for example, start here from an export to Excel, use the Power Query engine to transform it or to unpivot data. We have some other examples, multiple files here, which we can then convert into one file. The result, if we use Power Query in Excel, will be a new table. The advantage of using Power Query, or the business case, is more in the fact that, for example, you might have already users at this moment who are using Excel and linking tables using very exotic VLOOKUP statements, which are very difficult to maintain and to understand. Well, Power Query might be a much better alternative. Behind the scenes, Power Query will generate some kind of language, and it will do everything. This is an example of the M syntax. It can be generated, you can create it yourself, you can modify it, and you can also customize this using parameters to make it dynamic. So you have a lot of possibilities here in M. Everything that you do in Power Query when you start in Excel or when you use the Power BI desktop tools will be saved in steps. So all of the modifications that you're doing, you're importing data, you are changing data types, you're multiplying by this and transforming this and so on, is saved in different steps that you can also rename since one of the latest versions of Power BI. So you can see what happens. You can go back and certain steps you can also edit them. So that's a very advantage. If you look at the Power Query tools in Excel, that's the best way to remember how to use them. Power Query will prepare your cookies. Power Pivot or tables will bake the cookies, the data model, and then you can use Power View, Power Map, or Excel to present and share your cookies. So Power BI is as easy as baking cookies, especially when you work in Excel. Okay, so it's time for a small demo. So let's have a look at what we can do with Power Query. I just have a couple of examples. So let's have a look here on my machine. I prepared a couple of demos, and the first one is just actually here in Excel. Let's wait for a moment to see if it opens. Oh, it's a little bit too slow. Well, I'll do that locally then. Should have that here too. 1 second. Apparently my machine decided this afternoon, right before the presentation, to become a little bit slower. Voila. So I'm here in Excel, and if you have a look here at our tab, I need to go to Insert normally, or Data. Where is it again? Query. No, voila. Here I am. Sorry, I was a little bit confused. So we start in Excel. What we have created right here is a possibility for a user to enter a starting date and an ending date. And then actually by clicking on the refresh button, which should be here in the data part, a table will be generated, which is a date table, which you can then add in your data model. Now if you have a look here, if I just go back to home, then to the query, no, I need to start from here. Voila. So if you have a look here in Excel 2016, you will find Power Query here in the ribbon. If you come from a previous version of Excel, there was actually a tab with the name Power Query, so it was very easy to find back. If you go to Excel, it's a little bit more difficult. Otherwise, it would be too easy to find back. If you click here on Show Queries, you will display the queries that we are currently using. And what you notice is that I have a table which is generated based on the input. And I created also a small function in here. So let's have a look at this function. I will just go to Edit. And the system will open Power Query. What you notice is that we see a function in which can have an input or 2 input parameters. You can invoke the function, and it will create a date table. If I go and have a look here in the advanced editor, that's where the magic happens. Here we can actually see the Power Query script, which will generate a table. Now, this query editor isn't really the nicest one, although it will detect syntax errors if something goes wrong. You can try to figure out for a long time how to fix it. So what I have done is here, let's have a look, in Notepad++, I've actually pasted the same query, and there, for example, you can also have some color recognition available. So what we have here is a let function. It will create a table based on an input date, 2 dates actually, start date, end date. This is how you create a function with parameters. Based on the information, I will first create a list of months. I will find the number of days between start date and ending date by simply subtracting them. Using that information, number of dates and duration, I will create a date list. And from that date list, I will create a small table. Let me just drop down a little here. And once we have the table, I will start to do a number of transformations, change data type, figure out month, day of month number, year, day of week number, and so on. Actually, behind the scenes, some variables will be generated, and all of that, in the end, will actually be saved here when I call this function. Now, this function is stored here in my Power Query. it's actually in my data model. What I then did actually is I created a new table by invoking the function. If I go here behind that table and then to the advanced editor, where is the button? Voila, here it is. Then basically you notice that, if I can zoom in here, no, that I'm actually looking at the information in my Excel workbook. So I will fetch start dates. Here it is the start date, here is the end date from the Excel file, transform it, pass it along to the function, and it will create a date table. So it's something I can do in Excel, and then the user doesn't have to do that him or herself anymore. You can make it even more flexible if you want to. It's just a silly example. Now, if we are here in Excel, working with Power Query, we can actually do the same thing if you use Power BI Desktop. Power BI Desktop is a free tool you can download and install. What I've created here is actually a Power BI or a PBIT file, which is a Power BI Desktop template file. And it's a new option that has become available last month. And if I open this here, you notice he also asks me for a start date and or an end date I can load. And basically what happens then is that the query is re-executed. Takes a couple of seconds, and it will create a dimension table also here in Power BI Desktop. And then as a user, I can continue to load extra information or the other tables I would like to use, and then later on to create my data model. So creating a data dimension can be kind of difficult, but you can make it very easy, for example, by making use of a Power Query function. If I just go into the advanced editor here, in Power BI Desktop, you also notice that I can work with a function. I will create my table. And in Power BI Desktop, since a couple of months, we can now also use parameters to make it even more dynamic. In this case, when I launch my file, he asks me for a start date and ending dates. It doesn't really make much sense if you start the 1st of January, maybe in the 1980s, and you end in 2050. I think that should cover most of your BI needs. But just an example on what you can do. So these are some examples of Power Query. There are many more, but there are also some other tools I need to cover today. One of them is then Power Pivot. Power Pivot is actually also a plugin in Excel. In Excel 2016, it's automatically in there. In other versions, you might need to activate it. And with Power Pivot, what we will actually do is we will create our data model. And according to Mr. Excel, Bill Jelen, founder of MrExcel.com, Power Pivot is actually the best thing that happened to Excel in 20 years. And I actually agree. When Power Pivot was introduced in Excel, it's actually a very powerful tool, and it still has a lot of advantages. Although nowadays, I'm more eager to start to use Power BI Desktop. I don't know if you can see the difference here between the two tables in Excel. The one on the left is actually a normal pivot table. The one on the right is a Power Pivot table. And there isn't actually much difference between the two in how a user uses them, but there is much more power behind this table than there is behind the other table. And that's the power of Power Pivot, the data model that you will create, and the metadata will provide in the data model. So using Power Pivot, we can make use of a lot of intelligent functions, smart functions, to be able to assist the user to create a data model. We basically can have a virtual limitless data capacity. So actually, Power Pivot is actually a mini analysis service which will run in Excel, which will be able to slice and dice your data. It should be able to work on millions of rows. Of course, also depending a little bit on the hardware of the machine you are running it on, but it should be a very powerful tool without all of these limitations we have in Excel, being, for example, 65,000 rows, 1 million rows, and so on, depending on your version. So using Power Pivot, you can start with your raw data. Then you go to Power Query, you import the data, you transform the data, and with Power Pivot, you will create a data model, a very enriched data model, which you can then attack, for example, as a user in Excel by creating charts or pivot tables or what you're used to do. You can use Power View to visualize the information. You can send it up to Q&A, for example, in SharePoint or on PowerBI.com, and you can also use Power Map. I will go into those tools in a few moments. So let me do a small demo again, this time on Power Pivot. So I will go again here to my file. Demo, let's have a look here, Power Pivots. So I have actually an Excel file in which I imported some data. If you have Power Pivot enabled, it's available in the ribbon in Excel. I will just open it. It takes a couple of seconds. And I import the data from NAV, making use of OData web services. And if you have a look here at the data model in my Excel file, it should resemble a little bit a star schema, where in the middle we basically have our fact tables surrounded by other tables to be able to slice and dice, for example, invoices or posted invoices by customer, by product on a timeline, and by a salesperson. And to create this kind of data model in Power Pivot, it's very easy to get started. You can import your data from different types of services. Of course, our data might be a very interesting one to use because you can create your query objects in NAV. Query objects in NAV can access data from multiple tables. They're very fast when they load and execute. You can publish them as an OData web service and very simply access them from within Power Pivot. You can also combine the information with information coming from somewhere else. Now, I don't have all afternoon or 2 or 3 days to talk about Power Pivot, but basically what you can do is you can build your data model, so you import the data as different tables. Then you need to verify if the data type has been recognized correctly. For example, an item number is not something that we would like to add in a report, so we need to make sure that it's recognized as text. So then he will not propose these silly aggregations of data. So we provide them here in the data model. Then there is also some extra information that you can do. You can create calculated columns. You can create new tables. We can use a lot of DAX expressions to enrich our data model. And there are some extra metadata table properties that we can also provide. So once we have created our data model here in Power Pivot, we can then simply close Power Pivot, and the user will have access to it in Excel when they start to create a pivot table. Now, just to give you a small example of a DAX expression, let me just go back here to my Home tab and the data. As you notice here, I'm importing some invoices from NAV, which actually come from the invoice lines that I published. Okay, let's just continue. That can happen sometime in Excel. So I've just imported some invoices, and what you notice here is that I have the number of the sales invoice line, the type on the sales invoice line, which I'm just importing from NAV. Then I would like to be able, for example, to link this fact table to an item table and a resource table to use them as attributes. The problem is that if you try to do this here with the number, it won't work. So we need to split out these numbers depending on the type, and that's, for example, a reason to use a DAX expression to create 2 new columns, which I have right here. New columns or columns which are calculated are shown here with the black color, and this is the very complex DAX expression that I am using. So let me just click on the column to see it. Well, if the type is item, then take the invoice number. So it's a very simple query language that you can use, and a very simple example. Once I have these 2 fields in the data model, I can then use them, for example, to link the invoices here to the resources. Okay, so we'll spend some time in Power Pivot creating our data model. Let me just close this again. Once it's closed, we can attack it actually from within Excel. I can now start to create a pivot table, and I can access my data. Now, creating a date table can be complex. So what you can also do, for example, if you have some data in Excel, and if it's a table in Excel, what you can do is if you put your mouse in there, there should be a button here in the Power Pivot tab for this table to also add it into a data model. So what you can also do, for example, if you have this row of dates in here in Excel, add it to the data model, go back to Power Pivot, and then what you can do is, if you have a look here back again at the data mention table, this is the date coming in from Excel. You can calculate here the years. That's really annoying today. So I will calculate the year from my date, the month, the day, the week, day, the month name, and so on, using these expressions. Here make use, for example, of a switch statement. I can also use that to generate my dates table. Okay, let me just close that again. The idea of using our Power Pivot tool is to create a data model. It's one thing that we can do. Now, if you, for example, have a number of Power Query tables in Excel, and you have a Power Pivot data model, you can't really combine them. So you will have to choose between one or the other. Okay. The idea of creating a data model is to be able to create a presentation of the data. For that, we can make use of Power View. Power View is also a plugin that we can use in Excel. Might not be the best tool at this moment anymore. Power BI Desktop is actually more interesting. Power View can be found in the ribbon if you're not working in Excel 2016, but in the previous version, you will find it in the ribbon, the insert, you can click on it. In Excel 2016, the tool has been hidden in the ribbon because Microsoft prefers you to use Power BI Desktop. Why? Well, Power View has been developed based upon Silverlight. Power BI Desktop is using visualizations which are based on HTML5. Using Power View, we can then create these enriched visual interactive dashboards in Excel. But let's have a look at how that works. So let me just go over again here. Power View, and I have actually an Excel file, which is the same Excel file that I used before, which has a Power Pivot data model that I'm now using here to leverage in a Power View sheet. And if it loads, it can take a couple of seconds depending on the data. Then I need to enable the content. What we notice is that, voila, I now have a dashboard here in Excel where I can see my customers here from NAV. If I click on one of the charts, that should be very interactive. If I have a look here at where they are coming from, I can also see some information. I can add some filters. How does it work? Well, what you need to do is just go and then in your insert menu, if you're not in Excel 2016, in the insert menu, you should see Power View. If you're in a later version, you need to customize the ribbon and add the button again somewhere, so you will end up in Power View. Here on the right side is where you will see your data model. So the data model from before in Power Pivot is available here on the right side. And I can start to create a dashboard. For example, I will select amount. You notice here in the fields that some of them can be aggregated, some of them are calculated using a DAX expression. And if you select the fields, they are added here in a kind of a table layout. So if I select amount from the invoices and then city from customer, I can see the information in table layout. And then the idea is to go here in the design menu and then, for example, transform this into a table, a column, a chart, to use a map to visualize the information. And depending on the visual that you select, you get some other possibilities. And once you have selected the visual, here on top there is also an extra tab which will appear, in which we can also provide some extra metadata. So I can transform this into a map. The first time he will ask you for permission to connect with Bing services, but it works quite quickly. And to give some extra context here, let's just take a field and drop it here in a property. So the tool itself is actually was inspired, I think, by reporting services, but meant for non-technical people. So instead of creating expressions, we will drag and drop fields into properties of visuals. When we create this, if we spend a little bit more time in there, we can create a rich interactive dashboard in Excel. And that's in a couple of brief words how we can use actually Power View. It's available in Excel. It's still available in Excel if you enable it. You can create more interactive reports. But I think the added value at this moment is more in the other tools that we use in Power BI Desktop. Before I go over to Power BI Desktop, there is also kind of a strange duck in the list of tools that we have available in Excel, which is Power Map. Power Map is also a plugin that we can use in Excel. And it's actually not really a Power BI tool or a reporting tool. Power Map is actually a tool that you can use as an alternative for PowerPoint. It's a presentation tool. If you have geographical data which you would like to present, for example, over time, then we can use Power Map as a plugin in Excel. In the past, it was named Power Map. In the latest version of Excel, it's actually been renamed into 3D Tours. If you create a Power Map, what you will create is actually a tour. A tour can consist of one of multiple scenes. A scene is actually something you would like to display on a map, so a scene is a map. And it can contain one or more layers, and a layer is actually the way you would like to look at your data, how you will visualize it, and for example also how you would like to play it using a date that you have in your data model. So we have a couple of examples of how you might use Power Map. Here on the left side, I've used Power Map with just a custom bitmap to present information. It can be a picture you take of your warehouse or your store or whatever you would like to visualize. All that you need are the coordinates on your image, and then map them to some other data, and you can make use of them in Power Map. On the right side, I'm using the standard Power Map to visualize information on an app coming from a Cronus database. Now, I'm using a simple Cronus database, so I don't have that much demo data. That's why it's relatively empty, sort of speak. Now, how do we get started with Power Map? Let me also demonstrate that. So I will go back to Power Map. I have an Excel file which I will open. It can use the same data model than the Excel file I used before with Power Pivot. It can be any data in Excel. And to be able to make use of Power Map, we need to go here into the Insert menu and open our 3D maps, or use the Power Map button as it was in the previous version of Excel. Takes a couple of seconds to open. Now, what we will create with Power Map is not a report. The idea of working in Power Map is to create a visual representation of the data that we can play. Now, if you start with an empty chart or with an existing one, what he will start to show is the list of fields that you have available from your data model. They will pop up in here, so you can drag and drop them, or you can just select them if you want to. The first thing that you need to do when you start with Power Map is explain to the globe or the visual that you are using where your coordinates are coming from in your data set. So in this example, what I have selected is the city fields from my customer table, which I would like to link to one of the fields I have available here in Power Map. I think behind the scenes, the system is using Bing Maps to present the information. If I link city from my customers, what I also notice is that Power Map was able to map 80% of the data. You can click to go and have a look at some more details to see why certain mappings didn't work, and then correct the data or add some extra information in your data set. Okay, that's how we get started. We need a location field. It can be one or multiple fields. Then we need to define what will be used to visualize the height of, for example, here the graphs that we have on our map. So in this case, I'm using the quantity from the invoices. I can also use any other field from my data sets, which I can use to create an aggregate. If I want to, I can also categorize these fields, for example, by salesperson, by country, by something else. And then, very interesting is I can also provide a date from my data set to be able to play the data. And once we have that, we can start to play around a little bit, zoom in, zoom out. You can change the pen depending on how you would like to have a look at the data. Here on top in the ribbon, you can select a number of themes. You can add some shapes. You can even add some extra charts, legends, some text boxes to fine-tune. Right now, I'm working in two scenes. Scene 1 I have here, scene 2 I have here. The difference is actually the same data, but visualized a little bit more or differently. Just to be able also to show that if you, for example, like to use certain visualizations of the data, it might have certain let's say, requirements on what you feed to Power Map. Just to give you an example, if I would like to present this information using this visual, for example, by country, then I need some information to indicate where that country is. So I don't have a country dataset selected at this moment in location. I have city. That's why he refuses. So I just created two datasets. Once you have your two tours in here, you can still go to the properties. Where are they again? Let me just try to open them. Nope, that's not. Here it is. No, you have some general properties. Sorry, they're here at the bottom. So we have some extra visualization options that we can choose from. And then here at the top, we have some extra scene options that I can select from. For example, we can work with some effects. And here you will see why we are using Power Map, because we can select, for example, how the camera needs to move when we will render the visualization. So let's have a look. If I play the tour, this is actually what I will see. The camera uses some kind of perspective to display the information, and I can see the data coming in from NAV, what did they invoice by region, by country, and I can have a look. Of course, it will work more nicely the more data that you have to be able to present them in a geographical way. So we can test how the map looks like, and if we like that, we can create the tour. We can decide how you would like it to be displayed, and to make it completely complete, you can also include a soundtrack. So it's not a reporting tool, it's a presentation tool that you can use, and it's a part of Excel. It works best with large amounts of data sets. Okay. Voilà. That's Power Map. A little bit the strange duck in the list of tools, but might be interesting to use. And remember, you can use a custom image which you can upload, so you can completely customize it. You could, for example, show your warehouse, show where your stores are located, or whatever is of interest to you. And then we have some new tool that we can use, Power BI Desktop. It has been not around for not so long, I think maybe one year and a half, 2 years, but it's a very, 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 very exciting tool. Especially because every month there is a new version, and we get lots of new goodies from Microsoft, and Microsoft is really investing enormously in the tool. I can pretty confidently say that if there is something you don't like about the tool, post it on the forum. If it's something other people also don't like or would like to have in the next version, chances are very high that you will get that. I think it has a very big priority within Microsoft. And Power BI Desktop is actually a tool that you can download for free from the powerbi.com website. You can just go there, download it, install it, and it has everything that I have also shown you in Excel, but better. And we have a Power Query in there to be able to get the data from the database. We can visualize the data. We can create very interactive reports. The visuals are based on HTML5. They're very interactive. And I will demonstrate that also by using or showing some examples. Okay. Now with Power BI Desktop, what we will do is we'll connect to data sources. So you start the tool, you open it, you connect to the data source of your choice. We have a number of options available. The screenshot here is from some time ago. In the meantime, we have many more options that have become available, and Dynamics NAV or Dynamics Financials is also in here since the latest updates. So we can also connect to that directly. If you want to, you can also even connect to Facebook to create a dashboard on the latest likes that you received. You can go to a Twitter, and maybe in the future we'll also get LinkedIn. It might be possible. It would seem logic. Okay, once you connect to a data source, you can then choose to import the data directly and then modify it afterwards, or you click on the Edit button, you will go into the Power Query editor, where you can use your M language to do some transformations. You load, you edit, or you load first and you edit later. Power BI will import your data, and then actually in the tool itself, you can also determine how your data might need to be transformed. So you can click here on the Edit Queries button to open your query, have a look actually at how it was imported. And here at the right side, you will notice that we're using a Power Query, visualized a little bit differently. So we fetched information from a source, we navigated, and we changed the data type of a number of columns. So you can make many more transformations if you want to using the tool. So we have a number of transformations we can perform on the data type. That's the very first thing I always recommend you to do. So all of the columns which have been imported, for example, from an OData web service, verify the data type is okay, which means that things that should not be numeric, make them text. Things that should be numeric, make them then numeric or decimal. And have a look at the dates, for example, which come from an NAV database. Usually they have the year, the month, the days in there, but also the hours, the minutes, and the seconds. So you can change the format so it looks a little bit nicer. So we transform the data using Power BI Desktop. We can see all of the steps, and since the latest release, we can also rename steps. We can also drag your steps around if you like to. So it's a little bit a workflow style, changing and transforming of the data that we are importing. We can then, of course, close and load the data, go back to Power BI Desktop. The changes will be applied to the data which was already imported, and then we can create our report. So as you notice, I also have prepared a number of small demos on Power BI desktop. So let's get started with an example. I have a number of reports in here. Let's take the first one, which is a report that fetches information from an NAV database. And if I remember correctly, and so let's have a look how it works. Voilà. So what I see right here is an overview of my stock for a number of items coming from our Cronus database. I can see the quantity, for example, in the item ledger entry table, and I also have the cumulated quantity, which is also calculated. So depending on what happens, the cumulated quantity also updates. So at any moment in time on the timeline, I should be able to see how much is in stock. I have some kind of a date visualization. I can filter on the item or items that are selected, and then the visual will recalculate and update. It's just a simple example. Information can be visualized in different ways using different types of graphs. The choice is up to you. It's still rendering at the moment. Here I selected a different type of charts. Okay, let's wait. Don't wait too long. What you notice is that I have a very simple data model in here. So I have a table item transactions where the information is coming from NAV, and then a table date to be able to do slicing and dicing on a timeline. What I get from NAV is the item number, the posting date, the quantity, and based on that, I can then also calculate a number of different fields. If you get started with Power BI Desktop, the first thing that you need to do is get data. In the case of NAV, you might do a get data feed, for example, or you can go directly to SQL Server to have a look at how this data here was imported. So I only get item number, posting date, and quantity. I can open the queries again, and let's have a look at what happens. So if I go here to the source, what you notice is that if I open it, I'm basically going to my database directly on SQL Server. So that's one way of fetching the data. I will go directly to SQL Server. If you go to SQL Server, what you can then do is you can, for example, execute a query. You can see a list of all of the queries of the tables here in your database. And then you can say, okay, I would like to fetch some information from SQL. So in this example, if I open the advanced editor, you will notice that we are fetching information here from the item ledger entry table. Just some columns from there. At the end, in the last step, what I'm doing is I am just removing all of the other columns I'm not interested in. So you notice that here on top, you have a number of buttons that you can use to filter out columns, filter out rows, to only end up with the information that you would like to have. That's the information which is coming in. Let me just close the query editor. And just use some pretty basic things in there. Then actually the interesting part here are a number of calculations that I have performed. So what I'm actually doing right here is I have my table, which I import from a database. I have my date table, I have the relation between the two. And then I will just create here a formula which will calculate the cumulated quantity from the item ledger entry table. And so you can see I'm using a calculate function to have the sum of the quantity in the item transactions table calculated, and then I'm allowing that to be filtered with information from the date table. And every time I do a calculation of my cumulated quantity, calculate the sum of the quantities until the date that I am looking at. So everything until and before that date. And that's an interesting or a DAX expression that you can use for that. I'm using it right here to get a cumulative quantity. You could also use that, for example, if you go to your general ledger entry table and you would like to see information or sums of quantities or amounts on your accounts. It's actually something that we use quite a lot in BI. Once I have those fields, they will actually enrich my data model here of the item transactions table, and then I can start to use them in visuals. So basically, if you have a look here, it is loaded. What you notice is that we have a number of panes here on the left side. And in Power BI Desktop, typically we start here to import the data. Second step will then be to create the table relations, and third step will be to create our reports. If you create a report, what you will notice here on the right side is the data of the tables that you have. And to create a visualization, you can just click on one of the fields or drag them here on the canvas, and then select one of the visuals that we have available here on the right top. And they are actually connected because there is a link in the data model. So this is actually a simple example of a simple DAX expression that I'm using. Next example, which I will show, is the sales dashboard from SQL, which is using also information from the SQL database with a little bit more intelligence. Let me just open that. Okay. So what we are looking at right here is also information from our NAV database. I can see our salespersons. Excuse me, I'm using the Belgium database. I have two companies in there, Krones België and Krones Belgique. I'm just displaying some information. How do I get the information? Well, if you have a look here at our data model, you notice it's a very simple star. I have my invoices minus the credit memos linked to some sales information, some customers, some salespeople. I also here have some tables which come into the data model, which I hide from the report view because I needed them to import the data and to create new tables. So what am I doing right here? Let me just show how it works. What I basically have in my database, which is hosted on a specific server, on a specific database, is I created a number of views. So if I go here to sales, what you notice if I just open the advanced editor, is that I'm querying a number of views which I've created on SQL Server, a view for customers, a view for sales headers and credit memos, a view for this, a view for that. I'm very simply querying that. Why did I use a view? Well, just to be able to get back information from all of the companies in my database. What you might notice is that here I also included an extra column in each of the views indicating from which company is this information coming. So in my view, I'm just doing a union of all of the information over the different tables. I fetch that information here in Power BI Desktop. And then what I can also do, for example, is go here and create a filter. So I can put a text filter, for example, on this company, which I did, to filter out the information from other companies. And once we have a filter in here, we can make that also dynamic by working with parameters. So what I did here in my data model is if I go to my parameters, there are a number of parameters, and one of them is a company parameter, which I am using. You can give it a name, you can give it a number of values, for example, the values of the names of the companies in my database, default value, current value, and it's also something the user might select if they open and run the report. From which company would I like to be able to see this data? So you can create your reports, your dashboards with information coming from multiple companies, and the company is displayed here. You can go back to manage parameters, change the value of your parameter to see the information from the different company. Just one example of something that we can do. Is it the best solution? I don't think so, it's just an example. We can work with these parameters in Power BI Desktop. That's a very nice feature. It was added quite recently, but I would also like to warn you, we can't use these parameters if you will upload your report to powerbi.com. So there, your report will be uploaded as is. And once it's uploaded, you can't change the value of these parameters anymore. So you might want to upload it multiple times to powerbi.com. It's a feature which is probably in development, which will probably arrive in one of the next versions, but it's not yet there. Okay, another example which I have prepared here, number 3. Let's have a look. That one I will run on my virtual machine, because it's connecting to a database which I have right here. And what we see at this moment is another example of dashboard that we can use. I'm just looking at the number of customers by salesperson, which I'm fetching from the customer table, the salesperson table, also having a look at what these customers did the latest years. And I'm trying to figure out, for example, which are number of active customers by year, the number of new customers by year, and by salesperson, just to see returning customers, yes or no, what's going on. To be able to create this dashboard, there are better ways. What did I do right here? It's just visualization of the data that comes in the data model. In my data model, I only have one table. This one table contains a number of fields, agent, year, month, number of new customers, number of active customers, and so on. Based on that information, I'm just using the visuals. And how did I find this information in the database? Let's have a small look here in the advanced editor. And what we notice is that the data is coming in by executing a store procedure. So I'm just running a store procedure on my SQL Server database, find the number of customers by agent. It returns me this data set, which I can then consume in Power BI Desktop. So another example of what you can do. If you don't like to work with SQL queries, you don't like to work with views, you might create one or multiple store procedures. You can also access them to harvest that information. Is it the best way? I don't know. It's just a possibility that you have, and you can create your reports based on that and your visualizations. I can also upload this information to powerbi.com, have it refreshed behind the scenes, making use of the gateway. I will show how that works also in a few moments. So this is here a dashboard because I have some timeline information. I might also be able here to zoom in, because I'm using a time dimension. Okay. That was another demonstration, so let's close this one for the moment. I have some more demos here, and I have another kind of dashboard, which is a sales dashboard. And this one is actually a bit more interesting. This is actually the way that I would recommend you to work. Now, you don't really have to make a choice, depending on the rights you have on your database. You can combine all of these methodologies, but this way I prefer to work. And what I have right here is actually a data model which comes from NAV, which resembles a little bit what we had in Power Pivots in Excel. So basically, I did the same thing. You can do that in two ways. You can do a get data. You can go, for example, to an OData feed. In here, you can just paste the URL that you would like to use. In the next window, you just need to authenticate to your service tier, and the data will come in. I recommend you to work with query objects. You import the data in here. Once you do that, just go over your tables quickly. Let me just wait a couple of seconds until I have my data in here. Voila. And then what you need to do is, in each of the fields that you imported, make sure the data type is okay. Once the data type is okay, you can do some transformations. And when all of the information is imported, here you can then create your data model. That was not the button to click. Let me just go here again. This was the one. So I'm using my OData web services. What's the advantage of using OData web services? Well, you don't need to manage security in SQL. If you would like to use any of the other examples, SQL queries, SQL views, SQL store procedures, you need some kind of user which is allowed to go to SQL Server and execute these store procedures, and you need to manage that in SQL itself. That might not be something you want to do. If you go the OData way, then you can use OData web services which are managed by the service tier. You can set up a separate service tier, you can manage the performance of that, and you can also manage all of the security of that in NAV itself. And what I have right here is actually a dashboard which I created, and I was a little bit inspired by the information that we actually have on powerbi.com when you create the content pack. It's basically a number of web services which I published in NAV, which I linked and then used to create a dashboard in here. So the dashboard is not the most spectacular, it's just the way that you create the data model. Even though we go to NAV and we import information from tables that might already be related in NAV, we still need to recreate these relations in the data model. So that's important. So we have a number of choices that we can make. You can go to a SQL database. You can go import information from any kind of database. There are some advantages, there are some disadvantages. Something I would like to show you is also the following. If I just launch a new Power BI desktop in here, is that there are a number of advantages, for example, going to SQL. If we go directly to our NAV database using SQL views, using SQL tables or SQL store procedures or data web services, you always have to recreate your data model in Power BI Desktop. If we use Power BI Desktop, that can be a little bit time consuming. Now what you can, for example, also do is you can say, well, I will go to SQL, and then in that case, of course, you need to know the name of your SQL server. Let me just click on OK. I wait a couple of seconds. I can see my databases that I have available in here. And let's go there. And if I go to an NAV database, then the list of tables pops up. You can select the table, filter it. You can also use a SQL query and so on. That's not really super interesting. If you go, for example, on the other way here to a data warehouse or a database on SQL Server where you already have created your table relations, you can make use of them. So let me demonstrate that. I will go here, for example, also select a finance table in an Excel database. Let me just wait 2 seconds. Still evaluating. Okay. And then what we can do is we can also click on the button Select Related Tables. Then the system will actually go and have a look at all of your foreign keys in your database, also select all of those tables. So they should pop up any second now. Once that happens, you can also click here on the Load button, and data will be imported. And the table relations will also already have been set. Now, this is taking a little bit too long, but don't worry, I can very quickly also do that here. Normally, I should be able. Okay. So here I have Power BI Desktop. So locally, it should go a little bit faster. So let me show how that works. I'll try to lose too much time. So okay, I go here to my SQL Server. Don't have a database name. By the way, if you go to SQL Server, you can choose to import your data, or you can also do a direct query on the database. What I have right here is a data warehouse locally. So let's also select here the fact table. Click on Select Related Tables, and you notice that all of the other tables are also selected because we have table relations or foreign keys in the SQL database. I can now click on OK. Wait a couple of seconds. The table or tables are imported. And the data model will normally also be created. Okay, apparently I have a little bit of data in my local data warehouse. It's the, let's say, the Adventure Works database from SQL, which is like the Cronus from NAV. It can take a couple of seconds for the data to import. Once it's imported, what you will notice is that, and that's the real added value, you can go, for example, here to the relations. They will already have been created. So typically what you can do, for example, is that you can prepare a data warehouse, a SQL database, in which you import data from one or multiple sources, how you would like to import it, whenever you would like to import it, and users can access that information. They all need to know the name of your database, and your schema will be generated. You might even already also have some calculated fields in there. Everything is done, and as a user, I only need to take care of inventing a great-looking report and playing with the visuals. So that's also another example of what we can do with Power BI Desktop. Okay, let's have a look at another example here. So I have, I think that was already open. Voilà. And what I have in here is actually maybe the best way to go. If you use Power BI Desktop, what we will do is we will connect it to a data source using all of the different types of data sources that we have and ways to import data. But the emphasis is actually on importing data. Except if you use direct query on a SQL database, you will import the data from your data source. Every time you click on refresh, all of the data will be re-imported again. There is no incremental load yet in Power BI Desktop. I heard it's coming. I noticed, I saw that on the website where you can vote for new features in coming releases. So it might be coming in the future, but it's not yet here. So imagine that you would like to take ledger entry tables, value entry tables, import them into Power BI Desktop and create a great-looking dashboard and report. Well, then you might encounter some performance issues. What I have right here is an example on working with data warehouse. which has already been created thanks to BI for Dynamics. In my case, I was able to use their software to create a cube. I'm not a cube expert, I know the basics about data warehousing, but using a wizard, I was able to create a cube based on my NAV database. It generated a data warehouse, it generated a cube with some calculations, and using the Power BI desktop tool, I can also very easily connect to that. So what you actually need to do is you just need to collect to analysis services. Let's wait a couple of seconds. Give the name of your analysis services server, and let's just show that using an example. Where is the query editor? Here it is. So what I'm actually have fetched here is information from my sales analysis cube. And if I, for example, here click on Add Columns, what you'll notice is that when you make a connection to a cube, you might have multiple dimensions in there, you might have multiple measures in there. Everything is already pre-calculated, contains data. You select what you would like to select, click on OK. Columns are imported. And the advantage is that all of the data is in the cube. You can still import that and load that here in Power BI Desktop, or Power BI Desktop can just connect to the cube and present the information. But you can do an incremental refresh behind the scenes. That's a big advantage of this tool. Now in this dashboard, I also did a couple of other things, because if you have a look here at the dashboard itself, I'm showing here where my customers are coming from, and if I zoom in a little bit, you can see, for example, the sales in this city for that customer also has a certain value. I have a breakdown here of my customers at the right top. I can see their sales information, credit information, debit information. And then, for example, depending on the sales information of my customer, I might want to send a salesperson there. And that salesperson might be interested to have a look. For example, well, I might need to go to Germany today. What is the chance that it will rain, for example? Just a crazy example, just to explain that besides the information coming here from the cube, you can also access other kinds of information. I can, for example, fetch information from the web or any other web service which might be of interest to me. So what did I do here in my data sets? I have a weather service which I am currently using, which for a number of cities is providing me information about percentage of rain, wind speeds, and so on. Where did I find that information? Well, basically, where is the advanced editor? I will show you. I'm going here to a website, erpmagazines.com, which you should check out. It's from a very nice person, Alexander Totovic, who was going to present with me today but wasn't able to come. And he created this web service for me, which I can just access, and it contains a table that it just gives back, and I can just access that web service. And the Power BI desktop tool recognizes this information as a table and can import it. So it's a very simple example. Actually, I could go to any website. Power BI Desktop is able to go to a website, recognize the tables and the data on there, import and transform it. So you can also make use of web services. There are lots of use cases. So I'm using this to enrich my data model. And I'm also importing information here from another web service that I'm using. So for example, it's a data feed that comes from somewhere else or some other kind of NAV database, which in this case contains some extra financial information about my customers. And here I can see, for example, the EBITDA data, the revenue of my customer and so on, which is in another database. So just to give you an example, that depending on the type of report that you want to create, you can harvest actually enormous amount of data sources. Just create your data model, enrich your data model, create your calculations, and then your report itself. Okay, another small example of what we can do here is this one. So what I have right here is a dashboard which is opening, hopefully quite quickly, which is actually a dashboard that categorizes your items depending on their sales. So we are getting a little bit deeper now into DAX expressions. What we can see here, for example, is I have 3 types of products, A products, B products, and C types of products. If I click here on A, I can see, okay, these are the part of the bicycle that I sell most frequently at my Kronos company, who are actually providing most of the profits in my organization. If I click on the B products, I can see my B products. If I click on the C products, I can see all of the other ones. So it's not by amount, by number of products, it's actually by percentage in the revenue that I'm categorizing which type of product that I have. I'm applying these on products, could also be customers or whatever information that you have in your data model. What do we actually need? We need some sales information. So what did they sell on what date for which product? And we need some product information, the name of the product, some pricing information, some quantities. What I will actually create here is a measure sales amount. So let's have a small look at how this works. If I have a look here at my sales table, I can see the data coming in from NAV, posting date quantity by item number, and this amount field is one which I calculate very easily. I fetch the quantity from the sales table, which I multiply from the price information from the product table. And because I have a table relation in my data relations, I can also use the related function here in a DAX expression to make use of that. So it's the power of DAX. If I have a look here in my product table, making use of the information I now have in my sales table, I can also calculate a number of fields. For example, I have a product sales, which I calculate as being the sum of the sales amount field in the sales table, in this case by products. I have the cumulated product sales, which I'm here also calculating. For example, I will calculate here the sum of my product sales in the product table for all products where the sales is before a certain date. So that's the cumulated sales which I'm calculating. Depending on the cumulated sales, it's not so difficult to also calculate the cumulated sales percentage of the total sales. And once we have that, then this column is basically then where the magic happens, depending on if it's more or less than 70 or 90% of the sales in total. I attribute an A, a B, or a C to this type of or to this product. This then generates a new column here in my data set. And once you have the columns here in the data set, all that's left to do is to create and visualize the information using a matrix and using different types of visuals. We have a lot of possibilities right here. So ABC categorization. Last but not least, I also wanted to show the 07 one. That one I don't have on my Hyper-V. That one I have locally. Voilà. Now, it's quite a lot of demos of Power BI Desktop, but I just want to introduce you to the different elements of Power BI Desktop, what we can do with it. And if all of this is not enough, then we can also make use of a number of new features that recently became available. One of them is R, and the other thing is forecasting. You might have noticed that in the smartness session of NAV, I presume forecasting was a topic. Well, forecasting is also something we can do in Power BI Desktop. What you can have a look at here on the right side are two things. So I have some data coming from a data source presented here in a line chart, and I'm using forecast functionality to predict basically what will happen in the coming year or the coming months. Now, this forecasting relies on a number of algorithms which are quite statistical, so depending on, you need to have enough data to be able to do good or to make good predictions. What you see right here is the difference between Power BI's forecasting system, the built-in one, which you can just enable in a property of Power BI, and the forecasting which you might access via R. And R is actually a programming language that you can use, for example, to also access machine learning experiments on Microsoft Azure. Now, how does this work? Two things. If you'd like to make use of the embedded Power BI forecasting functionality, in the latest version of the Power BI Desktop, you will need to go into your options, and it's a preview feature that you need to activate. So if I just go here to preview features there, this is where you just need to enable forecasting. Once you have enabled that property, then certain visuals will support it. Just select your visual. Go here, I think, on the right side. Where is it? On the last options tab, completely at the bottom, you will have a look here at forecasting. You can insert one or multiple forecasts, decide how they need to be visualized, and then they will be added here in the visual. The other one that I'm using is using similar information, but here basically I'm using my R to enhance my data model or my report. If you use an R visual, what you basically need to do is then program a little bit of R, which visualizes your data set. Now, R isn't the easiest language to get started with. What you can do if you want to is you can also have a completely R development environment that you can install on your machine, which I've already downloaded. It's R Studio, which you can then also connect to from within Power BI Desktop. So just export that script here into R Studio, and we can have a look. I will not go over all of the details, but basically I have some information, in this case in an Excel file, which I'm importing. I'm having a look at this information in the Excel file, and then using a number of functions from R, I will try to predict some information, which I will also then add in my dataset and visualize here in the end. So the data or the functions I use in R aren't the easiest ones to understand. Very small words, very little documentation, but they are extremely powerful. And the script, if I then execute it, basically also visualizes the information here. And in the last part is also able to do a forecasting, making use of a machine learning experiment. So just to give you an example of what you can do with R, you can also add that in your data sets. Could show you many more examples, but we only have a limited amount of time, of course. So Power BI Desktop is a very interesting tool to use. And I also demonstrated a number of patterns. And design patterns aren't only important in the NAV context. Patterns are also important in a Power BI context. And that's actually where you should spend most of your time. There's a very interesting website where you can go through. It's daxpatterns.com, created by two very intelligent people who go all over the globe, I think Marco Russo and Alberto Ferrari, who are actually the DAX gurus worldwide. So I really strongly recommend you to have a look on their website. And you can find some examples of patterns that you can also apply very easily on NAV data. Each of these patterns is explained in details with how you can create them. Most of them are explained in the Excel context, but they're not so difficult to transform into Power BI Desktop. And you can make use of all these kinds of patterns. Just have a look, daxpatterns.com. And by the way, they also have a DAX formatter tool that you can use. And if you get the possibility to attend one of their sessions, that's really something I recommend. Okay, so we have been creating a number of reports until now using the different tools that we have available. Now it's time to make use of them in the Power BI service, which means, for example, I can go to powerbi.com and create a dashboard. There are different ways now we can get these dashboards created. We can make use of the existing dashboards, or we can just upload our own. And then we can do that. Once we have our dashboards online, we can even do a little bit more. Now, let me just quickly demonstrate what we can do. So I should have my browser open in here. What you should be able to do is just go to powerbi.com, and then you can do a get data. You can decide on powerbi.com, once you have a free account, where you would like your information to come from. It can come from a file from a database directly, from your organization. Someone might have prepared that for you, or from a service. If you go to from a service, there are a number of services in here, and also some very interesting ones, like NAV. You can connect very easily to NAV by using this get function. All you need to provide is the link to the URL of your service tier, and then how to authenticate. It should work without a gateway. It can also work with a gateway. Once you have that, you can follow the wizard, and this dashboard will be created for you. So that's one way of getting data on here. Another way of getting data on here is, for example, when you have worked with Power BI Desktop. Do I still have one open in here? Let's have a look. I'll just open one again. So I can start from within Power BI Desktop and publish. There should be a publish button available at the right top. Just Okay, a couple of seconds here. For that publish, it will ask you for your account on PowerBI.com. Your report will be published. Or I can just, from PowerBI.com, import such a file. Everything that you create, for example, in Excel can also be imported into Power BI Desktop. So your Power Pivot data model, your Power View reports can be converted into a Power BI Desktop file. Once we have them available in here, we can create your dashboards. If you are a person who has created a dashboard and you'd like to share that with someone else, you can very easily do that by making use of the share button. You can use an email address of someone that you might know in your organization and just share your report with that person. Sometimes, depending on your own user rights, you can also decide if that person can only view or update what you are sharing. This you can do with the free version of Power BI. Of course, in the Power BI service, you can also upgrade to Power BI Pro, which gives you some extra storage capabilities. Instead of 1 GB per user, I think it's 10 GB per user online. If you use the gateway and you go to the Pro version, you can synchronize 1 time per hour, 1 million rows per hour. With the free version, it's 1 time a day. I think it's 100,000 rows per hour, if I'm not mistaken. But with the Pro version, you can also get the possibility, for example, to view or create content packs. And that's a little bit more interesting. You can give a content pack a name. You can share it with someone, with a group of users, or with everybody in your organization. And you just decide which dashboards, which reports, which data sets you would like to share. And if they also have the right to reshare, yes or no. You can make that a template and continue to work with that also in the future. And then people will see these reports popping up. So that's very short, very briefly, the Power BI service. You can upload your reports on there, so to speak. Once your reports are on there, you can also have Power BI generate some insights, depending on the data in your data set, the amount of data. The insights might or might not be interesting. If you do it, for example, on the standard Kronos database, then the system is intelligent enough to discover that you sell actually more pieces than boxes. But if you have more data in there, it can really detect some very interesting insights, and you can learn on your data and discover insights, which actually is what the tool is meant for. What you can also do once you have uploaded your file on PowerBI.com is ask questions. So depending on the names of your tables and the synonyms that you have provided, you can go on the, let's say, the Bing of PowerBI.com, just start typing in a question. You can say, for example, I would like to see in this scale the sales, or show me the amount where the entry type is sales sorted by customer, or just show me amount by customer. The system will do a search in or on your metadata, and it will present you the information, how you would like it to see presented. It's actually based on synonyms you can also provide on your Power BI desktop file. And then what you actually have right here is the wet dream of any manager. When they ask you to create a report and you ask them when would you want this report, they always say yesterday. Well, you can just say, well, just go to the Bing of Power BI, type in the report you would like to have, and it will be generated for you automatically. So that's one interesting feature to have a look at. So the Power BI service is online. I just demonstrated that. What I also want to mention is that we also have the Power BI mobile application. I can't really demo that right now. It's also free. You can download that on any device. It works on Windows Phone, Apple phone, Android, and so on. You can consult your reports depending on your phone. You might also be able to share, to pin a dashboard, to make some modifications, annotations, and so on. Very interesting also to have that besides the NAV mobile application. So just some screenshots on what you can do with the mobile device. But, and that's actually more interesting, once you have all of these bells and whistles on PowerBI.com and these very interesting looking reports, you can also embed them in NAV. So you can go back and embed them into the application. And that's embedded Power BI. I also have some slides in a demo, but I think with embedded Power BI, it's more interesting to start with a small demonstration. So what we can do, for example, is, let me just go open my web browser and go to NAV. So what I have right here is a web browser which is connecting to a virtual machine on Azure. And this is my data coming from my database. Let's have a look here at my sales people. and my salespeople are actually interested to see what's going on with certain customers. So if I go here to the salesperson purchasers, this is the list actually in view mode. What I can have a look at here is a report which is being displayed, and let's say this is not really the report I would like to see. I can click on selected reports, posted sales, and this might be of more interest to my salespeople. I can have a look here at my our Power BI report coming from the Power BI service, and I can see my customers. I can see them by country. I can click on them, I get all of the interactivity that I see in here, and I can see, for example, the customers of this salesperson are presented in an aquarium, who are the big fish, the small sharks, and so on. So all of these visuals are now also available, and I now also have them here in the application. I can also do an expand of this report and look at it in more detail. I might not even be the one or the person who created this report. All we need is someone who publishes the report on PowerBI.com, shares it with me, and then it can become available here in the application. And you can enrich your application. That's actually embedded Power BI. Now, how does that actually work? Well, what you will notice is that if you go here on your role center, you might get, depending on the role center, that you are using a Power BI part. In the beginning, it will be empty, and no reports have been enabled with you. What you actually need to do is you need to follow a wizard. And when you follow actually that wizard, I should have that here on the slides. So let's have a small overview. You can get Power BI embedded to work. So you go to the assisted setup in the application, and there what you actually need to do is set up an Azure Active Directory account. So it works via Azure Active Directory. If you do that, a wizard launches. You can launch that starting from the assisted setup, or you can launch that from the Power BI part if you have never done that. You have the welcome screen, which we never read. We click on the next button. And then actually, to be able to get Power BI embedded working and up and running, what you need are two things. You need an application ID and a key. And that application ID and key, you need to get that from Azure Active Directory. So what you actually need to do is you need to go to your Azure Active Directory portal as an administrator. You need to have the rights to be able to do that. And you need to create an application. Now, the procedure on how to do this, in the meantime, has also been documented on the new MSDN website, which contains all of the documentation for NAV 2017. But it's not so, let's say, straightforward to do. I think in this case, if you go to the Azure portal, the procedure works the easiest in the new version of the Azure portal. For example, if you'd like to get the Excel add-in up and running, or something else which is new in the latest release, then the old classic portal might be better. Anyway, you just need to go into the portal, create a new application, and just search for your app registrations, click on Add. You give your application a new name, for example, NAV 2017. Application type will be Web API, because we will link that to our web application or the web client. In the sign-on URL, all you need to provide is a URL to your web client. At the end, you need to append outlanding.html. If that works, then your application will be created on Azure portal. You can just click on it, go to the properties of the application, go to permissions. In permissions, we need to give Power BI access to the application that we are creating. So on required permissions, click on the Add button, go to the API, give the rights to the Power BI service. All that Power BI needs is view reports, but if you follow the wizard, it will also show a bunch of other permissions that you might want to append. Once that is done, then you will arrive actually in a blade keys, where the key is actually visualized. You need to copy that key. It will only be visible once. If you close the blade, then you need to recreate the key for it to become visible. So you copy the key, then you go back to the properties. Application ID is the other one that you need to copy from there. So now we have a key, we have the application ID of the application we created in Azure Active Directory, and using these two, we can then actually continue. Let me just go back a couple of slides. one next, to enter them in here. Once that is done, we only need to do that one time, and NAV can make connection with Power BI. When the user logs in with their Office 365 email address and password, they will be able to use that add-in to fetch and connect to reports that they can view on powerbi.com. And the advantage is that you don't need to teach every user to be able to work with the Power BI service or powerbi.com. No, you can have a few persons creating very interesting looking reports, assign them to users, and then they can just go into the application and use that part on any page and just fetch the report and show it combined with the other data in NAV. And to show how that works, it has been plugged into a couple of pages. There's actually a page that you can have a look at, 9006, the Sales Order Processor Role Center. You'll notice there's a part in there, and basically it's a Power BI spinner part, which you can have a look at. You can maybe even also open the code to see how it works in detail, but that little part is something you can also plug in any other page. For example, like I did here with the salespersons. Once the tool is up and running, it's very easy to get started. Okay, see I'm running out of time, so I will not demo that. Okay, so I tried to demonstrate a number of different tools that we have in the Power BI tool stack. Only had 1.5 hours to do that. We have seen a lot of tools, and the choice now is a little bit up to you on how do I get started. But I still have some tips and tricks, and actually the tools look very nice and are very nice to present and have a look at, but that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is to know how to get started. How do I get started with Power BI or any reporting tool or reporting project, so to speak? Well, we need to interview the business users, because in most cases, the person who creates the report is usually not capable to really understand what needs to be shown. Secondly, we need to understand what information is required and interview the business users. So you need to talk to the person for which you're creating the report. Sounds obvious, but in real life, that's not always happening. Okay, once we have that, we need to try to figure out which are the core numbers that you want to display. For example, the overall revenue, number of units sold, this kind of calculation. What numbers do we need to have available in our data model? Then, for example, do we need to compare this with budget? Do we need to compare that with targets, yes and no, where they come from, to be able to also predict on short, but also on long term in the data set and the reports that we will create. We need to try to figure that out. Then, which fields do I need to calculate? So which fields can I get out of a data set? Which ones do I need to calculate? How do I need to calculate them? How do I need to present these fields? Where can I find the information? Typical questions that you need to ask yourself. Try to create an inventory of all of that information. Try to see if you also need to compare and so on. So it's a process that you will need to go through. The most important part of any reporting project, any dashboard that you will create, will be thinking about and creating your data model. Your data model is the basis for everything which will come on top, and on top of that you will have your reports. And the reports that you will create will contain a number of components, and these components will end up in dashboards that you will make. But the most important part is the data model, getting the data out of your data sources into your BI solution, and then also think about how will I refresh that information. The best practice, in my personal opinion, might still be to work with some kind of data warehouse or cube that you use. You don't always have to go for the on-premise solutions. Microsoft is also coming with a SQL Server data warehouse, which is actually a multi-dimensional database, which you can host on Microsoft or on SQL Azure, which is also very powerful. And the whole Power BI tool stack has actually some capabilities built in to very easily connect to that. I personally don't have much experience with it, but I know it's available, and it might be very interesting to have a look at. Now, what is it eventually the power of Power BI? I think the power of Power BI is that we have a tool set in which we can find elements for everybody. If you look at the business user, they will be able to import their data wherever it's coming from. and then they can work with that data in the organization. The business analyst has a tool set at their disposal to reshape, to model the data, to do things that were difficult to do in Excel with VLOOKUP and much easier in the tool stack of Power BI or Power BI Desktop. They can create stunning visualizations, and they can share the information in content packs. The BI professional is able, for example, to connect to on-premise data sources, to actually have a multitude of data sources they can work with to empower everybody within the organization. And as a developer, there are also some very interesting languages to work with, but also some APIs that we can use, for example, to integrate with NAV or with other applications that we are developing ourselves. We can create real-time live dashboards. So I think there is something for everybody in Power BI. Whatever that you will do actually, or whatever your role is in your organization, I think Power BI is the one tool which has the capability built in to bring all data together. Voilà. That was what I wanted to present. I hope it wasn't too much or too little on certain subjects. So you can always contact me if you're interested in more information. So let's see if there are any questions, or any not too difficult questions.